Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to get into something deep, a little bit, philosophical, but something that affects us right now and has haunted us for actually decades. And we think about it as something that's a current thing, but it's not really new to the human experience. And that is looking for truth in a partisan, fractured world. Now, right now we look at politics and we say, boy, we've never been so fractured. We're as fractured as we've ever been in world history. And it's a little bit silly to say that because we have this recency bias that we tend to pay attention to and think of the right now. And our memory goes back only so far. And we don't think of things in our country that have divided us. We don't think about things in world history that have divided us as people. But we always pay attention to the right now. And you hear people when they talk about things like political discourse, they talk about how deeply fractured we are. I mean, it doesn't take much history to go back to, say, the Civil War to show that we have been more fractured than we are right now. I mean, for an entire chunk of our country to break off and form the Confederate States of America, a whole new country, kind of shows that we're not quite that fractured. But the truth is, we've always struggled through times of fracturing. And right now we are wrestling with that. We see that and we're fully aware of that, mostly because of the hyper-mediated world we're living in. We all have a cell phone. We all swipe through things and we see all the chaos, all the carnage, all the fighting, all the bitterness, all the division. When in reality, we've had to wrestle with that for quite a long time. So let's look into that and try to understand a little bit of where we are and how we can use the work from philosopher Martin Buber to move beyond that using his concept of the narrow ridge. So I'm going to read something from Martin Buber, and this is a small paragraph. It gives us an idea of what we mean when we talk about fracturing. So it says, the human world is today, as never before, split into two camps, each of which understands the other as the embodiment of falsehood and itself as the embodiment of truth. Often in history, to be sure, national groups and religious associations have stood in so radical an opposition that the one side denied and condemned the other in its innermost existence. Now, however, it is the human population of our planet generally that is so divided, and with rare exception, this division is everywhere seen as a necessity of existence in the world hour. He who makes himself an exception is suspected or ridiculed by both sides. Each side has assumed monopoly on the sunlight and has plunged its antagonists into the night, and each side demands that you choose between day and night. Now that sounds like right now, the way that people bite at each other, claim the moral high ground, claim to be the owner and arbiter of what is true and what is false, and how we tend to push each other into the other side, into a little checkbox of being right or wrong. However, this came from an address called Hope for This Hour, and it was from 1952. 1952, we had that kind of a struggle and that kind of strife. That sounds an awful lot like it was written, today. So, how do we work through this? Now, the problem ultimately comes in when someone has to focus on being right and being wrong instead of just looking for some basic thing known as truth. Now, unfortunately, as we move through the Enlightenment and into modernity and into post-modernity, the idea of truth went from a capital T to a lowercase t, and it went from something being absolute to something being situational. And you can see this being a problem when we wrestle with the concept of truth today. And you see people in our post-modernity cycle, whatever we're going to call this time that we're in right now, and people don't exactly even know how to categorize or think about truth. I mean, we think about basic things like, I know what a phone is. I can grab my phone and hold it up and it's a phone. Or I can talk about what a computer mouse is, or a remote control for a television, and we don't get all riled up about that kind of a thing. But when we start talking about what is truth, capital T, we tend to wrestle with that. And sometimes we even get so silly as saying things like, my truth. I need to speak my truth into the situation. But what you're saying is, I need to speak about my observation, my understanding. And the truth of the matter is, if I could use the word truth, is that no one has a monopoly on truth. Truth is. Truth exists. And it's ours to discover, not ours to claim. So that's the big problem that we have, is that we think that someone can have a monopoly on truth. It exists. It will exist long after we're long gone. And someone else long after us will wrestle with the concept of truth. But it is. So when we look at the concept of finding truth, you end up finding yourself on a narrow ridge, because most people are down in a valley somewhere bickering about their views and clinging on to those things, sometimes in violent and defamatory ways. Think about whenever you go hiking. You've got a valley that's down below you, and you can see down that valley once you get up on top of the ridge. And once you get up on top of the ridge, you realize there's not just a valley here. There might be a valley over here, and maybe one over here. And it's just it's a different view. You get up on top of that ridge and you start looking around and realize if you lean one way too far, you might fall down into this valley, or this way into that valley. But you start to realize that there's a lot of different things to see here. So the idea of the narrow ridge is Martin Buber's philosophy of being able to stand for truth and being able to see and understand all of the different things that are before you. Now, some of this was refined as he was reviewing the trials of Nazi officers, after World War II. Martin Buber himself is Jewish, and he wanted to understand, why do people do what they do, especially the horrific things that the Nazis did. So when you look and see those things, we tend to think of them as monsters, but then again, we run the risk of becoming a monster ourselves whenever we want to treat them the way that they treated others. And this did not sit well with Buber. He wanted to understand, what drives a person to do what they do. And this made him very much targeted, not by just the people on the pro-Nazi side, but the people on the anti-Nazi side. People who are Jewish wondered how a fellow Jew could want to, sit back and try to understand the monsters that perpetrated the Holocaust. And again, it's not like Martin Buber sympathized with the Nazis. He just wanted to understand. And that puts you in a weird situation, because a lot of people want to be on a side. People want to be on the winning side. They want to be on the right side. And so they bicker over things that make them right, instead of making things true. And that's not always the same kind of thing, because your opinion about what's right isn't necessarily what's true. So when you get on that narrow ridge, the first thing you notice, of course, is that, one, it's a ridge. And then you're able to then see things, that you can have an open mind to understand things. Now, I want to make sure that we're clear here. It's not that you're a moderate. So like today in politics, you have the political right, you have the political left, and then the people somewhere in between, they're the moderates. That's not at all what a narrow ridge is. A narrow ridge is not someone who's just not extreme on one side or another. If you're on the narrow ridge and you're looking down and seeing this viewpoint and this viewpoint, and guess what? There's sometimes more than two. There's might be 10 different viewpoints. We tend to like to put things in an either or box, and that's, of course, what's known as a false dilemma, where we falsely assume there's just one side or the other, and you have to pick. And truth is, there might be more than two, and you don't always have to pick, but it's okay if you do. So when you're on this ridge and you start noticing there's all these different views, it allows you to say, I'm looking for the solid ground here, the truth, and I want to then try to understand why people hold the views they have. Now, you could very well say, oh, I agree with these people, or I agree with these people, or I agree with these people in this valley, and that's okay. But to be able to sit back and try to understand, why do people have those views that I don't agree with? And also, very importantly, Why do I believe what I believe? There's so many people that are trapped into what they think is truth because they just simply chose to believe something and then never stop to ask them why. You see these man of the street interviews when you ask people basically, why do what do you believe? And they say, I believe in this. Why do you believe that? And you'll see it starts falling apart. Usually one question, two questions in, it doesn't take very far down the road to get to that understanding. So why do you believe what you believe? Most people really wrestle with that. And they'll get either really flustered and say, well, my parents believed it, therefore that's why I believe it. Or my grandparents believed it, like I vote this way because my daddy did, my granddaddy, my great-granddaddy did. Well, that's not a reason other than tradition. But what do you believe and why do you believe it? And that's something that's hard to wrestle with. My friends want me to believe this. To fit in this friend group, I need to believe this thing. Is that a reason? No, it's not a good reason if you're concerned about the truth. It's perfect if you want to live in that valley. But if you want to be able to stand for truth, you need to understand what you believe. And you need to understand what others believe. So that's what Buber was getting at. It's not like he was ever going to side with the Nazis, but he wanted to understand them. Why would you do this? What would drive a person to do this? And the truth of the matter is we would like to think that we would never do such a thing. But the truth of it is throughout the 50s and 60s, there were different scientific experiments done to try to see if people would just follow orders if given to them by some kind of supervisor. And it turned out that most people would. So when it comes down to the understanding of, I would never do that, the truth of the matter is, yeah, you probably would. We just don't like to think that inner monster exists. We like to think that we're on the side of right, on the side of good. But again, if you don't understand what's right and what's true, if we don't understand and care about and nurture the truth, we find ourselves in a situation where we'll gladly just do what it takes to be on that one side. So it is important to understand, again, that we're on this narrow ridge. And it's also important, so we're on the ridge and we can see, but it's also important to understand that it's narrow. And the idea of it being narrow is one of those things that we shouldn't necessarily focus on it being narrow because it's dangerous. Oops, I'm going to fall if I'm not careful with my footing, although that could be a situation. We understand it's narrow because not too many people are there. And quite frankly, not a lot of people want to be there. It's if you want to make it simple, what's your favorite sports team? Why? Why is it your favorite sports team? Most of the time it's based off proximity. So me being someone from Western Pennsylvania, well, you're supposed to like the Steelers, the Pirates, the Penguins. That's what you're supposed to do because you're from that area. And then every once in a while you'll bump into somebody who likes, the Dodgers, and you're like, how? And they just like the Dodgers because maybe they like their uniforms or like their story or whatever. They maybe their favorite player plays with them, whatever. But again, that's arbitrary too. Why do you like your favorite sports team? And most people really, truly don't know. They just do. Well, move that to politics. Why do you support a certain politician or political party? And again, most people don't really know until you start digging into the why question. And then from there, ask about things like religion. Look how many different religions there are. And if you look at Christianity, how the different flavors of Christianity out there. Why do you believe what you believe? Do you know? Over here, I've got several books on theology, and they help refine my thoughts about why I believe what I believe. So myself, I come from the Reformed Presbyterian tradition. Why? Well, these books help me frame that and understand that, to understand that I believe what I believe for specific certain reasons in my understanding of Scripture. So why do you believe what you believe? And even if you say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe, that's still a belief. You still have a structure, you still have a moral code, an ethical code, and you have all this framework that tells you that atheism is the way to go. Why do you believe that? What makes you believe that? Not just, well, I can't see God, therefore it's good enough. It's like, you need more than that, because you can't see wind. You can see effects of wind, but you can't see wind. So what makes you think what you think? And that's a difficult thing to be there, because it requires a lot of self-reflection, which we don't like to do because we're lazy. It's also something we don't like to do because it's scary. I mean, if we're down in that valley and we're firmly entrenched in that valley, we want to be in that valley. What if we start questioning ourselves and realize we shouldn't be in that valley? What if we realize all this time we've been wrong? That's a scary thought because, one, I've invested all this time and energy being in the valley, and now I'm finding out that I'm wrong. Most people don't want to go there. That's one of those things that disappoints them. It scares them, and also that pride kicks in. Like, I don't want to be wrong. I don't like being wrong. Most people don't like being wrong. But it's important to be wrong, because when you are wrong, then you can grow and learn. Because if you're always in the right and you think you're always in the right, where's the room for growth, for understanding, for knowledge? The best scientists, when they make a mistake, they don't get all dejected for the day. They use that as a data point. Okay, so if I added this and this bad thing happened, well, I know I can't do those things anymore. So I take this and then add this other thing instead, and then another negative thing happens. Okay, well, I can't do that either. And you go through that trial and error process until you figure out, oh, here's how I made the correct decision. We would love to be right on the first try every time, but that's not realistic. And it's also not realistic to hold on to beliefs that we don't know why we have them, or hold on to them when we have irrefutable evidence, truth, that shows us that we're wrong. And we should be willing to change those views. I've changed my views over the course of time. I used to always believe this or believe that, and then as I grew up and as I read more, as I learned more, as I observed more, as I studied more, I found out that some of my views absolutely were right, and then some of my views were wrong. Now, do I still hold on to those wrong views? No. Why would I? They're wrong. I tend to move towards what's right and what's true. And we tend to not want to do that as very much because, like I said, it's work and we don't like to be proven wrong. And what if being in that valley has given us certain status, certain friend groups, certain positions of power? Well, as soon as I find myself not in that valley anymore, I might lose all those things. Now, we forget to think that maybe over here we'll get new friends and new positions of power and new status, but we're afraid to lose these ones because there's no guarantee we'll get it over here, but we've got it established here, and I don't want to lose that. But what if it's wrong? Why are we so willing to embrace what's wrong? Again, that's why that narrow ridge is narrow, because not too many people want to get up on there and look. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with agreeing with that one thing, but being on that narrow ridge allows you to say, truth is my first focus. Standing for truth allows me then to clearly see this valley and this valley and this valley, and I might end up over here, and that's okay. I might end up over here, and that's okay, or clear over here, and that's okay. What matters most is truth. Now, as Buber mentioned in that part I read earlier, we get into the situation where we tend to think that we have to pick a side. And boy, are we called to pick a side. We're told that, you're either with us or against us. Well, that means I have to pick a side, right? Because I'm either for or against. And again, that drives us into that false dichotomy that I was talking about earlier. It's a logical fallacy because for us or against us assumes there are only two sides and that you have to choose. So what if I want a third way, a fourth way, a 10th way? I can do that. I don't have to be in the one or the other. But there's tremendous pressure. Do you have to be for us or against us? And even in today's world, you'll notice that if you choose not to talk about it, there's tremendous pressure for you to do so, or they assume you're on the other side. If you won't speak up, you must be with that other side. I've seen instances where you see famous people like athletes or movie stars being interviewed. Some of them can't wait to get political and they'll tell you everything they believe. Some of them just say, I just want to talk about the game, or I just want to talk about the movie. And the reporters badgering them, and social media users are badgering them. Like, you have to pick a side. You can't stand for that other side, do you? I mean, that's crazy. You have to stand for our side. When they just want to, look, I'm an athlete. I just play the game. Or I'm a movie star. What do I know? I just do my movies. And they just want to talk about their craft. But no, you have to pick a side. So there's tremendous pressure to do that. And it takes a lot of courage to say, you know what? I'm going to stay quiet in this moment because I don't know the answer. I'm going to search for truth. And when I find truth, then I'll make a response. But very few people want to do that because there's tremendous pressure to pick a side, even if they don't know. And that's a dangerous thing when we pick sides and have no knowledge of it. Truth takes time. Truth takes effort. Truth takes courage. And it takes time to look for that and to discover it and to think upon it and then finally take a stand based on what we believe is true. And it's a hard thing to do because, again, we face that terrible pressure from ourselves, from our own pride, and from others, from society, that we have to make some kind of choice, and it's got to be the one that conforms with what they believe in. Instead of just sitting back and saying, you know what, I don't know. I will gladly investigate and find out, and then I'll find out. Or lo and behold, I did some investigation, found I was wrong, and now I've changed my mind. And that's okay. We should be allowed to have that grace to change our minds because at the end of the day, if we care about truth, who cares about our pride? Who cares about social status? Focus on truth, and you'll be much better for it. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope that you will like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And if you didn't like what you heard today, that's okay. Thank you for hanging out this long. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.